You're a great
Thank you,
salesperson.
Madam Chair. Regarding the permitting application, that is to the PUC, correct?
Yes, it is.
Right. And that would be regarding a generation entity, that would be the first type of permitting necessary for a generation asset?
I think that, of course, coal is heavily regulated.
Federally, yeah.
The same for natural gas. And for air permits through the TCEQ.
Yes. Yeah, but
And so
PUC doesn't permit.
Right. No, it doesn't permit. And part of the fiscal note and part of the fees are generated to allow to cover for that. And that's, that's something that I've kind of wondered about is, with the feds, and I know when it comes to siting with our what we call our dispatchable, they do have a lot of Fed requirements, and I have a handout that you gave me last year on some of the federal requirements for wind and solar or renewables. But when it comes to siting, there's really nothing. And I do remember that when I was talking to PUC and to ERCOT, sometimes they don't even know where these are going. Now we've had some bills from you and Senator King trying to, say, hey, you gotta have power lines. You gotta have the stranded lines to get to you. And we've tried to make a little more sense of it, but I still think we have a long way to go.
Thank you. Regarding the permit, part of it is the setback parameters in your bill. The solars are 100 feet from any property line and 200 feet from any habitable structure. That's 200 feet is less than a football field in length, 2/3 of a football field. For the wind, and of course those are larger structures and have various aspects that are certainly different than solar, but it's 3,000 feet, which is 10 football fields. It's 0.58 of a mile, so over half of a mile. It's a big structure, or a big setback. The reasoning for that is regarding the 3,000 feet in particular, I guess, for the wind facility setbacks.
Okay, so the 200 feet matches the private resident setback provision in oil and gas in Section 253 of the local government code. On the wind, that became kind of the will of the Senate, when I was working with other senators. I mean, if you think about a 600-foot wind turbine, do you want that casting a shadow over your house?
Right.
I don't know. A tree, we don't have redwoods in Texas. But it was thinking about just a resident and how close it would be. I'm not saying a wind turbine could fall, but if it did, you'd say, well, it's 600 feet, maybe Senator Kolkhorst, you should do 600 feet, because if something sheared it off or something happened and it fell, it wouldn't touch the other property line. I was also looking at kind of wind currents. What if you had a piece of property that here had a wind farm, here had a wind farm, and there weren't setbacks? And if you say at that point, well, I'm just going to throw up my hands. I got a lease for wind farm because I got no value. I have no value in my land anymore. The setbacks would actually allow you, and this is kind of, but not quite scientific, and maybe I should do a farther setback, then that would allow me to, or you, to be able to lease your land, since your land is worth nothing at that point if you have small acreage. So Drew Springer, I believe it was Senator Springer, who we saw on former Members Day today, I believe he's the one that offered the 3,000-foot setback amendment on the floor. If I remember correctly, and all this paper up here, I could go back and see what Senate Bill 624 started with. If you
No, it's okay, Senator.
I think it was 1,000 feet. I know y'all don't want. It was 1,000 feet. It was 1,000 feet, and I can't remember. Senator Springer had an amendment on the floor, and of course he did represent a vast area in North Texas. and there was a specific reason. So I felt like, Mr. Chairman, a good starting point would be where 624 passed the Senate. Again, I was very willing to meet with Wind in the interim. In fact, I was very willing. We tried to meet with them this week, and we got no input, zero. But hey, I'm gonna give a shout out to Solar over there.
Thank you.
Solar,
Senator Menendez, you recognize?
We're coat and tie and everything. We're good.
I'm waiting for Senator Kolkhorst to finish.
Senator Menendez.
Senator Kolkhorst, thank you for giving us the shorter version of your.
I know it was 25 minutes last year.
I was just going to ask. So, and I think you may have answered the question. For oil and gas industry, is there a setback on the pump jacks?
There are. It's 200 feet.
200 feet from a residence.
Yes.
Is there a setback on the property lines? I think you have.
I think there is, but hold on. I gotta go. Okay. Let me see. I got it somewhere in here.
While you look that up, follow up. If you own a ranch and you want to have solar to power both your home and maybe to sell solar electricity, would having the setback impede somehow your property rights on what your choice is to do?
So your question would be, if I was I think we exempt installations on homes, but you're saying if you wanted to have your own solar farm for your own use, and it was smaller in size, I think we took care of that with an exemption on that for homes.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
Because we had that conversation. Because you can drive around and find them.
Absolutely.
All throughout, and you've been, you've done some really good work in wanting to do that.
The fact is, what makes this country great is we have property rights, and my concern is that some of your setbacks, particularly the 3,000-foot setback, that's almost a taking in a sense, because if you have a half-mile setback, now that if you have a 600-foot tall wind turbine, and if the concern is safety, then maybe an 800-foot setback.
I had 1,000 in the first.
Yeah, you had
bill.
1,000. That makes a lot more sense, because half a mile,
Let's
a
call
little more
Drew
over half a
Springer
mile.
and see.
I remember Drew's bill
Yeah.
because he had a constituent that was upset about the wind turbines next to their ranch, and I remember the bill and all of that. So sometimes we file bills because our constituents ask us to, and I get that. I just want us to make good public policy that doesn't take anybody's property rights.
In looking at this before I filed it, I thought, do I go back to the original version? And I think I left that amendment up to the will of the body. Maybe Drew worked it pretty hard.
Yeah, he did.
As I said, we were kind of thinking out in the interim, if you had, again, if you were surrounded and you said, King's X, I'm going to throw up my hands and lease mine, and what's the draft off the wind and different things, debatable. I think 3,000 feet is strident. But again, I left that to the will of the body.
I remember. I just still think it's a little bit could potentially infringe on people's property rights. And so I appreciate it. I look forward to hearing the testimony and working with you. I know that you are well-intentioned, but I also know you believe in property rights. And
Oh, I do. And that's, those 400 plus people in Fayette County fighting for their property rights. And again, I think there's a place for wind and solar. I think obviously as I drive west through Senator Perry's district and others, I gaze across the landscape and I see lots of wind turbines, and that's been a supplement to some of our ranchers' income, and that is a property right. I'm a little amazed at how they've started to encroach in more what y'all would still say rural, but areas that traditionally are not considered high wind areas, and then small land holdings, and that they would have to piece it together. And I'm very for property rights. If you look at folks that were born and raised in these areas, or that they moved there, many of them have put their life savings in those properties. That's where they want to die, looking at that sunset. right there. That's where they want to perish from, and to see the fragmentation that's going on there is very interesting. And so, again, we're one of the few states that has no sighting on this. Ohio being, from my studying, the most aggressive. I don't know. You could throw California in there, and they're number 2 and number 1 in solar, but they won't be. They're pretty strident, and they still have a lot of wind and solar. I think they're right up there at 1 and 2 and 3.
Very good. Appreciate it.
So it hadn't stopped them.
Thank you for
Thank you,
answering my
Senators.
questions.
With
Thank
that, we'll open up public testimony.